Let's follow the screen. I will read for you. Ask, and it will be given you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, it will be opened. Matthew 7:7. You must offer devotion all the time. Devotion is not something you offer once and then expect results. Through continual devotion, you must find that state of tranquility and peace in your heart. Then you will understand everything you have to do. Having found your direction, you must follow through. You have to focus on that one direction. Is your focus as sharp as the point of an arrow? Finding your direction is not difficult, but there are many things you must do beforehand to prepare. You must find the source of strength within yourself to move forward every day. The teacher closest to you is none other than your original mind. Your mind is more precious than your closest friend. It is more precious than even your mother and father. You need to consult your original mind. That is where God dwells. You need to reach the state where you can hear the voice of that mind. Our founder's words from Chong Song-Gyeong.
Thank you, Uncle Joseph. And so we finally get to the heart of the Sunday service. This was all in preparation for this, what we have now. So please welcome up our dear Uncle David Howard.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you. Please just join me in a word of prayer. Our loving Heavenly Parent, we thank you that we can come before your presence, and we give thanks to our true parents leading us through this time of final restoration. We pray that in some way we can hear your voice talking to us today, and that through our fellowship we can find strength and we can find companionship and all that we need for the glorious future that lies before us. We thank you and we invite you here in our names, our Jew. I'm reminded of a wonderful minister we have close, actually blessed couple, very elderly, and he was an Anglican minister, and his little words before giving a speech were, I pray that someone here will find something of value in something that I say, which is the kind of understated British way. But, you know, I was back in my mind in the time of the beginnings of home church, and actually I was in Washington DC there doing home church, going to various apartments, and I came across the apartment of a black Pentecostal minister and his wife, lovely couple. I got to know them, got to go to their church, forefront a lone white figure amongst a sea of wonderful, warm-hearted and very fulsome kind of praising voices, right? And it was very wonderful experiences that I had. I went once to their apartment for a meeting. I was invited there because they had a visiting minister from Africa, and that was a big thing. And this African minister was doing some healings in their regular apartment, right? So it was surrounded by other apartments. And it got so loud, right? He was putting his hand on people's foreheads and over the sick parts of their bodies and praising God and calling down tremendous power and spirit to heal this person. And several went through this and they felt a little bit better from what they experienced, but it was all going well until there was a loud knock at the door, and this was the janitor or the person in charge of the building. He'd received many complaints about the volume of noise and whatever was going on here, all the shouting, right? And I was just observing from my seat, and I could see that this man was a very small, white, actually Jewish man. Right? So the African minister opened the door, and his first words to the man who'd come along to complain and to stop the noise was, "Do you have anything that you need healing?" And the middleman, a little bit nonplussed, he said, "Well, I do have a glass eye." He had a glass eye. So he said, "Well, come on in." So this man, vaulting over so many barriers, right? He came in and he very faithfully kind of stood there, and the African minister put his hand over his eye. He was shouting even louder now, right? "God, give this man new eyeball! Give him new eyeball!" Actually, he didn't receive a new eyeball, but, and reflecting on that, at the time, I could have taken it kind of like my rational self could have criticized that, or, from many perspectives you could say, well, what is going on here? But the overwhelming feeling I had is how beautiful is faith, in people, when they have faith. It's a very beautiful quality, and I want to be such people. I want to work with such people. The rationality of it doesn't worry me. It's just that quality is very precious, and I think a very original quality, and something which I do value. So our worship or our religious life can at times be characterized as loud, right? It can be loud. There was this story, I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Elijah you'll find it in 1 Kings chapter 9. And, he's called down in this kind of same way, the power of heaven to set fire to an offering, where the many prophets of Baal couldn't do that with a nice dry offering, pyre and animal, but Elijah could be successful, even though he had doused off 3 times of water. So it made it more difficult for himself or for God, but he still brought down the fire from heaven, and that was a dramatic thing. And he was known for doing these kind of dramatic demonstrations of the power of God, raising people, healing people. This is common in the Old Testament. It wasn't just with Jesus, of course. So, but nevertheless, because there was a lot of persecution and a very corrupt regime in King Ahab and his wife Jezebel that has kind of entered our language as a kind of rather slanderous term to be a Jezebel, then many righteous prophets had been killed, and the only surviving one now was, of the time, Elijah himself. So you might know the story. He runs away, right? Sometimes that's a good tactic, right? He runs away and he's in a cave. So he's hiding in a cave. This great, powerful man of God who could bring down fire from heaven and, could banish all these, defeat all these false prophets. But now he found himself hiding in a cave, right? So imagine what's going on inside his own heart and mind. It's like, what am I doing? And he starts to pray to God, what should I do? And the story goes on that, he has these experiences happen around him, where it's clearly God working in his mind. God sends a great wind, it says, right? So this is obviously his retelling of the story. God sends a great wind that even breaks the rocks, but he didn't find God in that wind. and God sends fire, and God sends a hurricane, but he doesn't find God knows. When that has all passed, he hears or he senses the still small voice of God. So that expression has kind of come down to us. I feel myself it's quite a pivotal moment in the biblical history, especially Old Testament history. A kind of changing point to, of course, what was always there, but it's more a point of interiority, of things going more inward, right? So the power of God is not demonstrated in great works, but in this still small voice. Well, you know, there are different ways to experience God, right? And even Father said, amongst the very divided Christianity, which we often point out as a tragedy in divided Christianity, Father said, well, really, in God's eyes, 12 denominations were allowable. 12 denominations were okay. Why? Because we have different ways of kind of approaching God. It's like the 12 gates of our unificationist symbol, isn't it? Right? There are different avenues, and some people feel God in the loud praising and the music and the dance and everything spontaneous. Others like the kind of more quiet, ordered. We have a litany to follow, and we have a liturgy to follow. And we have quiet moments, and we sit nicely apart from everybody else, and or hide in the back of the church. This kind of so, I quite enjoy that myself. Right? I'm one of those people. Right? But we can experience God in these different ways. Often, scholars refer to it as 12 modes of piety. There's a space, so it's not one or the other. So Elijah showed that not only in those kind of grand, what we might call noisy moments, we can experience God, but also in the quiet moments, the still moments. And I think that expression is significant as well, because it's not a small, quiet voice, it's actually a still, small voice. So still is like nothing moving, right? Not even the movement of words, it's still. But that is his encounter at that moment when he needed it with the living God. I remember our elder brother, Reverend One Pilkin, the first disciple of our true father. He once said, I think in response to what he was seeing us do, or the way we were expressing our piety, he said, after you prayed, wait for a moment. Have a moment of silence. Right? I agree with that, actually. I think it's a very good practice. Or after we recite our family pledge, have a moment of silence. It's like just allows a little space to reflect. And if you think about it, if we really are in our prayer coming before Almighty God, if you are in God's presence, you won't say what you feel in your heart you need to say to God and then suddenly turn and talk to somebody else, right? It would be a little bit odd. Where is God in that, Rather, if you were in the presence of a great king or something, you would kind of allow a little silence and maybe step backwards, right? And then afterwards you might quietly talk to somebody else. You'd keep a certain reverence there. So I think this reverence is also a way to kind of listen out for God in the stillness. And I encourage you to do that. Speaking and listening, these are the kind of subject-object aspects of any relationship, aren't they? Speaking and listening, right? We have to do both if we're going to have a relationship with somebody. So it makes sense then, I think, that in developing our personal relationship with our heavenly parent, there are going to be times when we are speaking. We could call that praying, right? And there are times when we are listening. Maybe we could put that in the category of meditation. And do you notice that Father in his speeches many times talked about his prayer and meditation, right? Prayer and meditation. Because it's much more personal and private. we don't know what that meditation was, right? We don't know how he did it necessarily. But you can be sure that he took time just to be still and just to commune with God without words, beyond the level of words. Don't you think so? So, he urged us to have meditation. I don't think that was necessarily a formal, structured kind of meditation, like you might have a mantra meditation or the different forms, which all have their value in this kind of finding this avenue towards God. But, he had his way to do that, and he talked about that. So that's something that we should also consider. And in this speaking and listening, we can develop both aspects. That's what unification would call subject conscious and object consciousness. That sounds all very highfalutin, doesn't it, right? But we have to learn both. What is saying, we have to know how to do both to be a rounded person. Right? So how many times, it might be only me that experiences this, but how many times do you find that you're speaking to somebody, and when you stop speaking, maybe it's their turn to speak, and then when you come to speak again, you get a sense that they're not really listening to you. Right? Rather, you have a suspicion they're just thinking up the next clever thing they can say. Right? Maybe I've been guilty of that myself, right? That's why I know it so well. Right? That's probably the reason. But they don't actually. 50% of this operation is you have to listen. What is the person you just talked to? What are they saying? Listen to what they're saying, and then when you hear what they're saying, you're going to modify your idea. Your next kind of comment is going to be based and built on that, and enable you to come to some higher place together. This is the beauty of this subject-object relationship, in which we say, God sees himself in that image and has to be there. God has to be in the middle of that kind of subject-object relationship when it's working well, right? So this is speaking and listening. And I think in our relationship with God too, we need to cultivate that. So was Elijah, what was going on here? Actually, if you look at Christian commentaries or biblical commentaries, very often they will say, well, this was his conscience, right? He was listening to his conscience. I like that idea. Or we might even say original mind, right? It's giving that little space to converse, as in our reading Father invites us to do, is to, in a way, talk to your conscience and talk to your original mind, right? If you are able to do that, this means there's kind of two minds there, isn't that right? Because who's doing the talking and who's doing the listening, right? So there must be a kind of dynamic going on there. Exactly how it works, I don't know, and I'm not too worried, right? But I just know everything happens in this kind of subject-object relationship. So Father talks about our original mind as being our closest friend. It's our closest friend. So this is a kind of first port of call for any question or something. And as a lie, what should I do? His answer came that way. So too, many times we have that kind of question. What should I do? If we then think, in this context, I had one little experience recently, and that was at one of our UPF events, a very lovely event. We had a number of guests come down to London from Birmingham, which is quite far away. And amongst them was a very wonderful Muslim imam. And this person, Imam Shahid, is quite young, and it's a very multi-ethnic, multi-city in the UK. Has a huge number of mosques and other gurdwaras and other places of worship from different traditions. And he gave a testimony, and this moved me because I'd never really heard this kind of personal testimony from somebody, an Islamic leader or somebody from a Muslim background. And he said that he came into his job as an imam at this particular mosque through a very academic route. You know, he had all the proper training, right, along with a couple of other friends, and they arrived in the mosque to be the new leaders of this mosque. And you know, he didn't really feel so much for this place, Birmingham, you know, but he was asked to go to this place and to this particular mosque, so you know, he was following that instruction. But then he started meeting the people, the young, and he saw that they had many problems. Some of them had, these are young Muslims as part of the community, they had drug problems, right? Or they had families where they had abusive parents. And he saw this as a reality. But actually that stirred something in his heart. So he found his calling, he said. I felt, you know, why God or Allah had sent me to this place, and why I should stay and why I should work there was to help with the very real social problems amongst his own community. And I was very moved to hear that, because as I said, maybe it's just that I haven't heard it before, but it's not so often spoken about, this kind of personal calling to a mission like that. And that's very common, isn't it, with other religious traditions. It's a long-standing thing in the Christian tradition and in our tradition. He felt a calling, and I like that expression myself. Are you used to it? You know what I mean? If you feel a calling, it kind of gives you a direction in life. One thing I like about it is not personifying it or attributing it necessarily or presumptuously to God. It's not God told me to do this, which has a different feeling behind it. But just, I felt a calling to do this, or to do this work. Yes, the kind of implicit idea is that is God's request. But it's not stating it, right? It's just, this is how I heard it. This is how I felt it. This is how that still small voice came to me. So it's beautiful for that aspect, I think. And you know, we have been thinking and are thinking much about newer and younger people, shall we say, coming into a new generation of leadership for our movement generally. It's very heartening to hear that some young people have this experience of like a calling. Right? It absolutely, what they're being encouraged to do from others is actually, you know, more important. It's preceded by their own feeling. Like this is, I'm feeling called by God to do something like this, and therefore I'm ready to accept. So, as I said, it's very heartwarming to hear those kind of testimonies, and I think it should be that way, really, because when you're called to some leadership job in our movement, it's not an ordinary job, is it, right? We can't say it's like that. It's something very, very direct that. But I'm not really thinking about new leaders as such when I'm saying this. I'm really thinking about all of us. You know, what is our calling? Our calling doesn't have to be just our whole direction for life or our job or mission. It can be even on a much shorter term basis. It can be today. You know, what is God asking me to do today? Or what should I do just to deal with this particular situation? You know, we can have some calling from God about that situation. So it actually affects all of us. Or I'm part of a community. What would God like me to do to you know, offer something that maybe only I could offer? Right? I don't have all the time available, but I have a certain amount of time, but I want to use it well, and I want to feel it's contributing to others, to the whole. So, you know, that's when we would be listening out, isn't it, for some kind of small voice to tell us, you know, what our calling might be. The biblical passage that we read, it's in Matthew 7:7. This has always intrigued me, right? It's a very beautiful passage, and Jesus there says, "Ask and it will be given you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Of course that means women as well, so she who knocks it will be opened, right? We're not just talking about men, right? I'm quoting an old version of the Bible here. So it seems to be saying the same thing 3 times over, right? In 3 ways. But I think there are subtle differences, and I think that's why it's mentioned 3 ways. Ask, seek, and knock. These are all kind of actions. They're the actions from the subject. It's something you have to do, right? You have to get off your backside, in a way, metaphorically or literally. And you have to ask, you have to seek, and you have to knock. These 3 things. But they all get a response. One way of looking at it, I think, is that the first is, if you ask and you shall receive, things will be given to you. This is like asking and receiving direct help from God. Because if you never ask, if you don't put it into your prayer, it's very, you can't really expect an answer, right? So this is part of that conversation. So the first is direct help from God. And even Jesus on to doubt, would a parent, when their child asks for a fish, give them a snake or something? It's a parental response. He's saying God will respond, because if the child asks for something, what does the parent's heart want to do? I want to find any way to satisfy this genuine request and genuine need on the part of my child. So he's explaining about the parent-child relationship that we have with God, but that we also need to ask. The second, which is seeking and finding, I tend to think of that more as recognizing one's own effort. Seeking is putting some kind of purposive heart and longing into something. You're really seeking something. It means it's continually in your mind and heart. You want to keep searching until you find something, right? Kind of putting it, and that's necessary. And somewhere, this is maybe one's own effort, which is being talked about. You will find, but also, what help will we gain? We'll gain spiritual help. So it's also help from the spiritual world. If you're really seeking to find, that will come if you maintain that kind of longing heart or that kind of desire. Do you follow me? Right? So if you're an Irish Catholic, right? If you say lose your keys, you drop them on the ground somewhere, you pray to St. Jude. Because St. Jude is the patron saint of lost things, right? And this person has a special responsibility in the spirit world to help you find something that you've lost. But if you don't pray to this person, it's a good person to... I tried it. Yes. Yeah, absolutely, right? With the help of an Irish brother, right? I was at an annual general meeting for our family gathering, and I think my wife, said, "Can I borrow the keys for the car? I've got to get something out." Always in the back of my mind is thinking, "Uh-oh, what's going to happen to those keys?" And I said, "Of course, dear, right? Here are the keys." And she came back and said, I don't know where the keys have gone, right? I dropped them somewhere. So this was awkward. The car is locked, we're far from home, the keys are missing somewhere. And this Irish brother, Joe, told him this story, he overheard it, he said, "Well, you should pray to St. Jude." Okay then. And sure enough, moments later, together we found it on the ground. We found the keys there, right? It's proven, right? It works. So the patron saint of lost things is to help. But it's very there. And the message that came through to us, at times when we're getting this kind of guidance, is that if you want help from the spiritual world, you have to ask, right? Because we are the subject. And, it's like anybody, if they don't know you need help, then they're not going to be able to help you, right? Or exactly what help it is that you need. So, we're all ready to help, but you need somebody to ask. Now the third one, what was the third one? Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Well, I think of that more as help from other people. You knock on the door, that's your responsibility. Bang, bang, right? But someone has to open that door. And actually, if you think about the person on the other side of the door, when you get a knock at the door, right? What's your unstoppable instinct, right? You have to open it, right? At least it's curiosity. Who on earth is that, right? And what do they want, right? And I don't know about husbands and wives here, but maybe relate to this. Often, you know, when there's a knock at the door, my wife turns to me and she says, "Who is it?" Or the phone rings and she says to me, "Who's that?" Maybe she expects I have certain powers. But in a way, it's just, you know, her heart is thinking, well, I want to know who that is. Darling, shall we go together and answer the door? No, it was, off you go and answer the door, right? But, you know, it's unstoppable. You'd have to be a little in a strange position if you heard the knock at the door and you just, what, hid under the table or something? Or, you would do that. So it's natural. So if we knock, you know, there's somebody there to help us. And, you know, amongst human beings, you know, who doesn't want to help somebody else? It's very few, actually, right? If you express a need for some help on the street, you want directions to somewhere, most people's instinct is to help you, right? And it's very beautiful, it's very natural. So that is there. So there are lots of things there to help us, right? And, you know, I think this is what this little package is talking about. It means there's help from many different directions. If I read from Father's words, this also comes from our Hunduke that we had on Thursday, thanks to Ulla Torresen for pointing this out to me. Father said, "Finding your direction is not difficult, but there are many things you must do before to prepare. You must find the source of strength within yourself and move forward every day. The teacher's closest to you is none other than your original mind. Your mind is more precious than your closest friend. It's more precious than even your mother and father. You need to consult your original mind. That is where God dwells. You need to reach the state where you can hear the voice of that mind." One major reason why we might hold back, right, even we feel some calling, I think it's because we still view the task or the thing we are feeling we should do is something that we have to do on our own or by ourselves. Right? That's maybe a natural resistance in there. But see, these all involve some manner of help from somebody outside myself. And that means we don't have to do it alone, right? So there is always help there. And in the same section of Chun Song Gyeong, Father says, and I don't know if we have it on the slide. Have you got that on the slide? Yes. You must find the source of strength within yourself to move forward every day. However, you cannot succeed with your own power alone. This makes you prone to impatience, right? So you need the help of your friends, of your teachers, and of God. I find it quite interesting there that it's not only God. In fact, the Father here puts God kind of third in that list. And nothing is without reason where Father says it, and teachers. Right? So they are there to help us. Friends are there to help us. Teachers are there to help us. And then God is there, right? Backing up everything. The same God, the same help is waiting for us on the other side of that calling when God, you know, is seemingly saying, I think I should do this or I think I should do that. God is waiting to help, as are other sources of help. So finally, I'm going to end with one of my favorite Bible verses, right? It's actually a very simple one. And that's the next one here. You'll find it in the first book of Samuel 10:9. You imagine the scene. This is where Saul has just been anointed, the first king of Israel, by Samuel, the last of the judges and the prophet there, right? And he's this commitment to be the first king. Can you imagine what's going on in his heart, right? Or, this is a huge responsibility, and it's so beautifully expressed here. It just says, when Saul turned to leave Samuel, God gave him a new heart. When Saul turned to leave Samuel, God gave him a new heart. And then he goes on to tell some immediate stories about, Saul is now almost like a changed person. People start thinking, is he one of the prophets? He wasn't counted that way before, but he's just behaving like a prophet, right? He's speaking, wise words, and he's, exercising this kind of authority, and starts to get a bit of a reputation there, right? But God gave him a new heart to be able to do what he was being called to do. And I find it very beautifully expressed. I find it so reassuring myself. I imagine he had many unspoken worries, but he became through this a changed person. So, we say heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? And the king's crown could be heavy. It's almost designed to be that way, at least in some of our traditions. It's designed to be that way because it's like for whenever you have that crown on, it's a reminder, It's a reminder that you have some heavy responsibility on your head, but it's not there for suffering. It's there for just to kind of, that comes with it. I have to maintain a certain dignity when I'm wearing this head. It's going to off. So, what I encourage you to do today in summary is to really listen for that or those still small voices, that still small voice, and know that you are not alone, and know that God can give you a new heart, right, to be able to do whatever you feel you're being called to do. Thank you. Please join me in prayer. Our loving Heavenly Parents, we want to offer our gratitude to you, also to the rich and wonderful tradition that we have through the Old and New Testaments and other religious traditions, and also that has been so amazingly added to through the life work and investment of our true parents, and the extraordinary legacy which comes down to us more than we can possibly read, let alone digest and understand. So we pray that we can go forward with all these wonderful tools and helps that you're giving us, and not least the support that we have from friends and from community and from being part of a worldwide movement that is really just trying to respond to your command and your desires in these last days under the expert and wonderful guidance of our true parents. So we thank you that we can be part of this. We want to renew our commitment this Sunday and pray that you can always be our guide and be the voice that we listen to. We thank you and we offer this prayer of gratitude in our names. I do so as a representative of everybody present, David Hannah of the Blessed Central Family. Amen.